Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Tim Butler. I'm a state representative from the 87th District. I live here in Springfield. I'm the spokesperson on the House Redistricting Committee. I'm joined by my three colleagues from the House Republican Caucus, Leader Ryan Spain, who's on the Redistricting Committee, Leader Avery Bourne, who's on the Redistricting Committee, Leader Tom Demmer, who has been a super sub in the Redistricting Committee over the last few days. I want to start off by addressing a complete fabrication on behalf of Chairwoman Hernandez. In her testimony today, she said, the changes we made, meaning the majority, the changes we made not only reflect testimony provided the last couple of days from members of the public, but also include revisions to address concerns raised by Republicans. That's a complete fabrication. The only thing that we have advocated for as Republicans throughout these entire hearings are two main points. One, the use of ACS data is flawed to draw maps. It's been testified to in committee many times. And secondly, that politicians should not be picking their people, picking their constituents. And for her to say that Republicans somehow had a part of this process is ridiculous. And I think it underscores the fallacy of this entire operation we've seen since the hearings kicked off on April Fool's Day. This has been a complete mockery of the process of what we've seen over the last couple months. As I said in the committee this morning, the people of Illinois woke up first thing this morning to find out who their politicians were going to be for the next 10 years. With legislation dropped in the middle of the night. And the chairwoman has no idea how that stuff was drafted. That's what she testified to today. It was drawn by staff, it was drawn by consultants who go unnamed in the secret room over in the Stratton building that you've all been made aware of. The people of Illinois deserve better. They deserve better than this process. They deserve better than the Democrat majority in this institution. This continues what we've seen for far too long in this state. And I find it beyond ironic that as our hearing was going on, there was another hearing virtually for the federal courthouse in Chicago with the former chief of staff to Mike Madigan, the former clerk of the House, and the former executive director of the Democratic Party of Illinois, Tim Mapes, who drew the current maps that we have, and much of those same consultants and staff that helped draw Leader Hernandez's maps learned under Tim Mapes. We need better in Illinois. We as Republicans stand with the people of Illinois, with the 600,000 Illinoisans that signed petitions in 2016 to go to a fair mapping process. We've put forward solutions to get us out of what we're doing right now, and the Democrats have ignored it time and time and time again. I have legislation. Leader Spain has legislation. Jason Barrickman, Senator Barrickman has legislation that gives us things to do other than the process that we see unfolding before us. I've been involved in this for a long time. I've been around politics for a long time. This is absolutely one of the most shameful things that I've seen. Absolutely one of the most shameful things. And they know it. They absolutely know it, and they continue to do the same thing. The people of Illinois deserve better than what the Democrats are giving them. And they deserve better moving forward. And I would call on the governor to live up to his word, that he was going to veto partisanly drawn maps. Governor Pritzker, speaking directly to you, veto these maps. Because as we proved today, they are partisanly drawn. And that's your word. That was your bond to the people of Illinois. Are you going to break your bond with the people of Illinois? With that, I'll turn it over to Assistant Republican Leader and member of the Redistricting Committee, Representative Ryan Spain.
Well, thank you, Leader Butler, and for your work over many months on the House Redistricting Committee and the work that we've done in collaboration with the Senate. And you have to wonder now, what was the purpose of that work? What was the testimony received from countless witnesses at hearing after hearing? Did they waste their time? Did we waste our time? Because what we're seeing here today is gerrymandering at work. We're getting a world-class view into the best practices of gerrymandering. And I've said it before, gerrymandering is inappropriate, whether it's done by Republicans or by Democrats. It just so happens that here in the state of Illinois, Democrats are better at doing it than just about anywhere I've ever seen. Now remember, these are the same Democrats that stood up and gave Mike Madigan a standing ovation on his way out of the building in our January session. These are the same Democrats that elected Chris Welch to be the new Speaker of the House, who stood before all of us, Republicans and Democrats, and claimed, today is a new day in Illinois. It's a new opportunity to work together in collaboration and bipartisanship. Nothing that has happened here is any indication of a new day. It is a worse day today in Illinois than I have ever seen in my life. The actions that are taken here in contradiction to the 600,000 people requesting redistricting reform, to the dozens of community advocacy groups who have said, don't proceed down this path. Don't throw away our work as a state on the census, which was heralded as a best practice in the nation. Don't jam through a map without giving us adequate time for public review. The people will remember the actions that the Democratic leaders are taking today in this building. They're the same actions that took place 10 years ago, the same actions down to the day. The Madigan playbook that was developed by Tim Mapes, who has testified and given sworn affidavit to the federal court that he was the guy that drew the maps. That same playbook is in place today. Drop a phony map, have some hearings, pretend that you're receiving testimony and indulging the opinions that are submitted at the 11th hour, and ram forward with all full speed so that you can do anything you possibly can to maintain your power and your majority. And as we learned today, it's not just about politicians picking their own voters. Now we're going to let judges do it the same way in the state of Illinois by remapping the Supreme Court. And make no mistake, it's not a coincidence that this happened. For the first time in our current Supreme Court map, a sitting justice was not retained in an election by voters. And so it's no coincidence that it's now time to, in fact, change the entire Supreme Court. One of the central issues in that Supreme Court election was the Supreme Court's refusal to allow the voices of 600,000 people to be heard and for an independent process to be developed for our legislative redistricting. People need to be held accountable. The 30-plus Democratic legislators that voted for independent redistricting reform, the new members of the Democratic House of Representatives who are elected with promises to champion fair districting, to end partisan gerrymandering in our state, need to be held accountable. Governor Pritzker, you need to follow through with the commitment that you made to voters when you were elected as governor, that you would not stand by idly anymore and allow the same failed process to remain as the law of the land in the state of Illinois. We can do better than this. We must do better than this. The people of the state of Illinois are waking up, and I hope that they'll pay attention. I hope that they have long memories, and I hope that they remain here as a part of the state of Illinois. Because never before, not even in the redistricting activities that Mike Madigan orchestrated and presided over, have we ever had a redistricting process for the state of Illinois where we're losing population after 10 years. So I hope everyone will hang in here with us. We have a lot of work to do together to put Illinois back on the right track. What is happening today takes us further in the wrong direction. And now I'm pleased to turn over the podium to Assistant Leader of the House Republican Caucus and member of the Redistricting Committee, Representative Avery Bourne.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm Avery Bourne, State Representative for the 95th Legislative District, and I live in Morrisonville. And I'll be brief. You know, it might be really easy to say, well, you guys are in the super minority. Of course, you're up here complaining. But what we heard today was that the dozens and dozens of groups from across this state who are independent, who voiced their opinion in dozens of hearings before the first draft was dropped, who voiced their opinion in the interim before the second map was dropped, all had a pretty similar message. Don't use the ACS data, which we've also requested, but also give us ample time to give input before the final vote. They just want to be listened to and to have their concerns taken into account. And we saw today that that's not the case. In fact, when the chairwoman was asked, will you commit to giving those advocacy groups 2 weeks to look this over, which meets their own self-proclaimed deadline? Will you give them 2 weeks to look over it? She would not commit to giving them more than a day. She wouldn't commit to giving them any time. And this shouldn't be surprising because these advocates in the last week we've asked them, how much time do you need? And they said not hours, not days, it will be weeks for us to go through it once we get this data, once we get the maps. It will take us weeks to know if our considerations were taken into account in the drawing of this map. We saw that they were in fact given not weeks, not even days, but hours, maybe even minutes to look over this before the hearing today. And we have no commitment that they'll get any longer than that. So I would also say to Governor Pritzker, you said you would veto a map that was drawn by politicians, partisans, or their staffs. You wanted it to be independent. And today we saw that this map was only drawn by politicians, partisans, their consultants, and their staffs. So please live up to your word and veto this map. I will now turn it over to Deputy Leader Tom Demmer.
Thank you, Avery. Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon. Over the course of the last few months, a number of community advocacy groups and public interest groups have come forward with a unified message to the General Assembly, and that has been, do not use American Community Survey data to draw redistricting maps. It's inappropriate, it's not accurate, it doesn't reflect the actual counts of people who live in the state of Illinois and where in the state of Illinois those individuals live, and it is a flawed data source which should not be relied on to accurately draw legislative redistricting maps. The problem has been, during the first few months of this process, the Democrats refused to disclose what their data source was. It was asked at meeting after meeting after meeting, what data will you use to draw these legislative maps? And they did not respond. Only this week did they disclose that American Community Survey data was, in their words, one of a number of sources used to draw the legislative maps. And only this morning, on the very day the proposal was going to be voted on, did Leader Hernandez disclose that it was American Community Survey data and election results that were used to draw these legislative maps. The Democrats on the redistricting committee intentionally withheld information from the members of the committee and, more importantly, from the people of Illinois in order to deprive them of the opportunity to accurately review and consider the legislative maps that have been offered. They intentionally withheld that information. How can we have genuine public input when the majority party is intentionally misleading and withholding information from the people of Illinois? It's simply inappropriate, and it has deprived us of the chance to have an honest debate here today. When in a hearing earlier this week, I asked Leader Hernandez, was she able to identify any advocacy groups who encouraged using ACS data? She said no. And I reminded her that 55 community interest groups signed a joint letter saying, do not use American Community Survey data. I believe that's why they did not disclose they were using American Community Survey data, is because they knew it would be met with universal opposition. It was inappropriate during the process to use it. It's inappropriate to use it today. The census data is the only way to get a fair count.